Bernie Sanders beating Kamala Harris. Bernie Sanders is beating Kamala Harris 2-1 among black Democratic primary voters, a new poll finds. This is from The Intercept. And remember, smash the like button. If you haven't pressed that like button yet, get going. And I'm sorry, this is recorded, so I can't interact with you live, but we will be interacting with you in the live chat, if that makes sense. Somebody will be interacting with you right now as the premiere is going. So, 3 weeks after launching his presidential campaign, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders is leading all other announced candidates in support from black voters, a new poll finds. The only potential candidate who polled better with African Americans than Sanders, according to the poll by Morning Consult, is former Vice President Joe Biden, who has not announced a campaign. Despite a persistent notion that his supporters are disproportionately white male bros, the new survey suggests that Sanders is actually slightly more popular among black Democratic voters than white ones, indicating that the narrative that developed during the 2016 campaign may no longer hold, if it ever did. Keyword narrative, which I'm going to get back to. Sanders' support among black voters at 28% puts him in second place among that demographic, behind Biden at 32%. He trailed Biden 31 to 25 among whites. I would suggest that when Biden actually gets in the race and more about his record that is not so kind to black people, especially black men that are in prison because of the crime bill that Joe Biden drafted, I think those polls might go down a little bit. There appears to be a strong class element at play in the finding. The same poll found that the demographics Sanders is least popular with, at 19 and 70% respectively, are Democrats who make more than $100,000 per year and Democrats who have postgraduate degrees, two qualities that typically, if not always, overlap. Because of the structural wealth and income gaps, the population is heavily white. Sanders, meanwhile, receives his strongest support from those making less than $50,000, a group that is, for the same reasons, much more diverse. The poll found that 30% of those with the lowest income backed Sanders. And frankly, the gap between white and black people in terms of earnings is significant. So I would venture to guess a lot of that under 50,000 group is African American. Senator Kamala Harris, Miss For the People herself, has half as much support at 14% among black voters as Sanders, according to supplementary polling data provided to The Intercept by Morning Consult. The findings are drawn from a sample of 2,587 black likely Democratic primary voters. Cory Booker comes in fourth at 6% among black voters. Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke both registered 4%, while Senator Gillibrand, Mike Bloomberg, who just announced he's not running, thank you, Jesus, former Attorney General Eric Holder, Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, and others all clocked in at 1%. So, before I get to Kamala Harris and what this means, I want to talk about Bernie because I interviewed Michael Tracy, a former Young Turks reporter, which we aired yesterday, so you could go check out that interview. And I made the point that I think this notion that Bernie Sanders has a problem with African Americans was always very overblown. Any candidate that was running against Hillary Clinton, if it was just a two-way contest, I mean, let's face it, it was a two-way contest between Bernie and Hillary. I mean, the other two that were in there for 5 minutes weren't a factor. Any candidate that ran against a political machine, it wasn't just Hillary Clinton Bernie Sanders was running against, it was the machine around her. Bill and Hillary Clinton had basically been going down to the South, to churches, making inroads with the black community, not just in the South, but all over the country for 20 years. So, number one, he had no name recognition in 2016. How do I know that? I did a lot of interviews in the South, in South Carolina and other places where people, if a lot of people didn't know who he was. This was the first time they even heard of him, but it was already baked into the cakes. Well, we know the Clintons and blah, blah, blah. And as a white person, not just a journalist, but as a person, I was very careful not to come off condescending to those black voters that were supporting Hillary Clinton. You don't want to be like, well, why don't you know what's good for you? I did point out to some African Americans that I interviewed, well, what about the crime bill? What about welfare reform? What about repealing Glass-Steagall, which really harmed black people? As a result of repealing Glass-Steagall, that's what led to the 2008 global financial crash, which didn't get a lot of coverage, but more black people were foreclosed on than white people. The banks and their agents were predatory lending, specifically, even more so in poor black communities. So I think Bernie Sanders or any candidate was destined to get their clock cleaned, particularly in the South. Hillary Clinton had more name recognition than any other candidate probably of the last 2 to 3 decades. Bill Clinton, a lot of African American people remember Bill Clinton, going on African American TV, playing the saxophone. And frankly, a lot of voters, not just black, white too, are not so informed on what policies they were or were not for. So they just say, oh, the 90s were good, the economy was good, and I, honestly, straight up, a lot of black women I interviewed, a big part of their voting for Hillary Clinton was first woman president. So I think this notion that Bernie Sanders has a major problem with African Americans was overhyped. Did he have a problem by way of the results? Yeah, he got his clock cleaned among older African Americans, but the schedule was also front loaded for all those states, which obviously was to help Hillary Clinton. I mean, it was shown in WikiLeaks that the DNC was making memos before Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders even announced, basically preparing for Hillary to be the general election nominee. So I guess my point is, number one, when you have no name recognition as Bernie Sanders, when you're an old white dude against somebody who's frankly beloved among the black community, the older black community. Bernie Sanders, corporate media doesn't talk about it. He won the millennial black vote, just like he won the millennial white vote, millennial Latino vote, excuse me. So yes, on paper, he had a problem, but I think there's context to that. It was who he was running against, how the schedule was front loaded. And, he didn't have enough time and the more time, if you remember, the more time on the schedule between primaries, the more time he campaigned, the better he did. The more people heard his message, knew who he was, the better he did. So my point is, I think what the polls are showing now, 2-1 against Kamala Harris, is frankly, he's a known quantity now. And I also think, I've always said this, every 4 years there's millions more 18-year-olds voting. White 18-year-olds, black 18-year-olds, brown 18-year-olds, indigenous 18-year-olds, LGBT, handicap, whatever. All vulnerable minority communities. So what I'm saying is, I think his message, especially the tweaks he's making, it might seem like a small thing. And I know Ty, our photojournalist, at the Bernie rally thought he was like reading from his notes too much. Well, I watched his entire speech in Chicago. And I'm not saying this as somebody who likes Bernie. I'm saying it just on the eye test. That's the most personal I've ever heard him talk about when he talked about getting involved in the civil rights movement and the student group to desegregate housing at the University of Chicago and why it was personal to him. I thought it was great. And I think it's a message that's going to resonate not just with younger black people, but older black people, because I didn't know that whole story, and I do this for a living. So I'm assuming most black voters don't know the whole story. And this notion by a lot of Hillary Clinton people and establishment people, well, that was in the 1960s. What has he done for black people since? Well, his policies would help all people, but also black people. There's a lot of black people without health insurance. There's a lot of black people who have no education and can't afford school. There's a lot of black people that in their communities are the most hit with environmental toxins and pollution. Just look at Flint, East Chicago, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Cleveland. These are black communities. Detroit. So I think what you're seeing right now is, number one, he's a known quantity. Number two, he didn't stop after he lost. He's been barnstorming the country. He went down to Mississippi to stand with the Nissan workers. He's been to Kentucky. He's been to Arkansas. He's been to other southern states since 2016. And number three, I think, honestly, and I've always thought this, and you got to be careful how you talk, Bernie Sanders' appeal is about class. It's not about race. So I think whether it's poor white people, poor black people, working class white people, working class black people, black people don't only, and I'm speaking as a white person, so I don't want to speak for black people, but black people don't only vote based on social issues. They also vote based on their wallet, just like white people, on their kids' education, just like white people, on environmental issues, just like white people, student debt. There's a lot of things. And I think Bernie Sanders is leading more and more in a lot of speeches with criminal justice reform, bail reform, and a lot of things that obviously disproportionately are of interest to black communities. So, it's the reverse for Kamala Harris, and why I said from the beginning, what has Kamala Harris accomplished in the Senate that she is a better choice for president than Bernie Sanders or anyone else? There's a difference between qualified to run. She's qualified. She was a attorney general, a district attorney, and now a senator. She's qualified. But being qualified doesn't make you the right candidate. What has she accomplished? She got into the Senate and within 6 months was meeting with Hillary Clinton's top donors in the Hamptons. She has moonwalked on Medicare for All within 24 hours. She's also moonwalked. She was for free public college in December. She moonwalked to debt-free college in January. You don't think any of this has to do with who her donors are? And by the way, I'm not ready to report it now because I'm still researching, but she has a pretty big wig fundraiser coming up in Malibu, California, and some of the people co-hosting that fundraiser, kind of questionable. I don't want to report it yet because I'm still researching and I want to have my facts right, but stay tuned. So she's not a name quality. She's not a well-known quality. I mean, her biggest highlights were grilling Brett Kavanaugh and others in congressional hearings, which was good. I'm not taking it away from her, but she hasn't really accomplished anything. Bernie Sanders has, contrary to what you hear. What has he ever done? He's the amendment king. He just led an effort that for the first time, the War Powers Act is being used to try and stop the United States, supporting genocide in Yemen. He's gotten, I believe now, over 20 co-sponsors on his Medicare for All bill. Now he has a bill. I'm not in love with it being with Chuck Schumer, but fighting the stock buybacks and all this. Fight for 15. Bernie and he forced Jeff Bezos to raise the minimum wage at Amazon, in addition to twisting Disney's hand. And I'm pretty sure on the campaign trail he's coming for Walmart next. So you look at this, and I think he didn't have as much of a black problem as the media tried to paint. And you want to know how I know this? The polls support it. So, non-whites, 64% favorability rating. And this is from Gallup 2018. There's another one I saw recently. Sorry, I don't have it. He was at 73%. 73%. And I also think from this new poll from Morning Consult, well, you have the majority of your support coming from working people under $50,000, making under $50,000. Your worst support is over $100,000. Well, let me guess why those people over $100,000 don't like Bernie Sanders. Maybe they'll pay a little bit more in taxes. Maybe they think, of this mentality. There's no such thing as a free lunch, even though most of them were probably born with privileges and built-in benefits that a lot of people at that under $50,000 range didn't have. But I can promise you there's a hell of a lot more people hovering around $50,000 in this country than over $100,000 in this country, as you could see with the income inequality. So this is a good start. Let's not do jumping jacks. Let's not declare Bernie's weakness in 2016 now his strength. But he's making inroads. And I also like the fact that this isn't being talked about a lot, that he's talking about going after red states. Because I agree with him. Obama said in 2004, there's no such thing as blue states, red states in the United States. No, there is such thing as blue states and red states. However, in a lot of those red states, a lot of those Republicans are closet Republicans. They just don't know it. That's why you have a lot of Donald Trump supporters that when I ask them, and when pollsters ask them, who would you vote for other than Trump? Bernie is a popular choice. You want to know why? Because they voted for Trump based on a lot of progressive promises. I'm going to repeal NAFTA. I'm going after the banks. Everyone's going to be covered healthcare-wise. We're going to end these pointless wars. Did he mean any of it? Of course not. But, that's what fake populism does. When fake populism meets economic desperation and hopelessness, that's how you get a Trump. How you defeat a Trump is with real populism. It's not that hard. And we know what's going to happen based on these polls. The corporate media establishment is either going to not even cover it, Bernie Sanders at a very solid 28% among African Americans, or they're going to pretend, well, it's early and no, these polls aren't right. Every other poll is bad for Bernie Sanders. Good. Polls with him higher, well, we got to look at the context. We got to look under the hood and blah, 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 blah. As far as Biden, I think Biden is having the same thing Hillary Clinton had, frankly. Remember, Hillary Clinton, before she ran again, before she announced she was running, and that period after Secretary of State, before she announced her run, she was one of the most popular politicians in the country. She had very high approval ratings as Secretary of State, and then that period between Secretary of State and when she ran. It was a whole other story after she ran because, frankly, people saw that this is just same old, same old. And more, and obviously the WikiLeaks showed, that her campaign was basically trying to, it was extreme makeover, Hillary Clinton edition. I think you're going to see the same thing with Joe Biden, not just among whites, not just among blacks, but among whites too. I mean, he is what he is. He drafted the crime bill. He was for welfare reform. He was for segregated busing. He did not come around on that as soon as other civil rights leaders did. And frankly, when they talk middle class Joe, I mean, I think once it comes out that he too was for NAFTA, that he too was big on the TPP, Biden's going to try and run an anti-Trump campaign if he runs, just like Hillary Clinton. But people are waking up. People in the Rust Belt, people in the South, people all over the place. More and more people don't just vote on personality or who speaks to them charismatically. They're looking under the hood. That's why Bernie Sanders is so popular. I can promise you, the 13 to 15,000 people that were out there freezing their behind off for Bernie Sanders in Brooklyn, and that's part of why I think I have a cold, because I wasn't dressed warm enough. They're not there because they think he's some charismatic guy. They're there because he's authentic and he's producing policies that would help their life. And when they look under the hood at his previous record, it comes out consistent and clean, and he's not a phony. So I'd be, record this video. I think if Joe Biden announces that those numbers with African Americans, once he's inspected by actual journalists, I don't expect it to come from the corporate media, but more and more actual journalists, status quo, GoFundMe, so we could cover the campaign. Joe Biden's in trouble. Joe Biden's in trouble. And I don't think these numbers for Kamala Harris are particularly good, because make no mistake, the key to winning the Democratic primary is twofold. Number one, whoever brings out the most minority voters, and number two, whoever brings out voters who have never voted before. So it's not, Bernie does have to bring out the progressive base, which I don't think he'll have a problem with. Frankly, the way Elizabeth Warren is looking, I think she might have to drop out early because she's just not catching on, and I don't really see it happening, to tell you the truth. She's behind in New Hampshire to Bernie Sanders significantly, and she's from the neighboring state, Massachusetts. But I think Bernie Sanders, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who won in large part because she brought out new voters who had never voted or had stopped voting. I think Bernie Sanders, if he brings out more African-American voters, if he brings out new voters who haven't voted, and frankly, if he plucks away even 5 to 10% of the Hillary Clinton vote, he's your nominee. Even if they try to rig it, which we're going to talk about next, he's still going to win if that's the case. So we'll see. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statusquo.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statusquo.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.